I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. He speaks, and the sound of his voice is so sweet, the birds hush their singing, and the melody that he gave to me within my heart is ringing. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own, and the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known.
Hello, everyone. I'm John Coleman from ApocatastasisInstitute for the Humanities and Alternative College and High School here on New Milford, Connecticut, USA. The purpose of this broadcast is to get into Christian meditation. This presentation is entitled The Soul a Garden. And we will be off to the races once we get our title card queued up. And like so many presentations on this worthy channel, this broadcast grew out of a discussion we had in class lately. And I thought this medium would be the best way to introduce this topic. And once the bubble switches, we can get on with things. There we go. The Soul a Garden on Christian meditation. And that, of course, was our image. The opening hymn, the bumper music, if you like, very waltzy, I suspect early 20th century on that account. And here we have an image of a garden. Of course, that's a reoccurring theme, a very deep theme in especially patristic theology of Israel as a garden. Of course, the return to the Garden of Eden might be a summary of the entire story of salvation history. The church's garden, the soul, the individual Christian soul as garden. That's what we're going to kind of focus on as we consider meditation here. Meditation needs, like a garden, cultivation. And I encourage everyone to join us for prayer online or in person, as the case may be, as we sing the Divine Office here at the Institute, this liturgical prayer. It's a different type of prayer than we're talking about today. It should lead, liturgical prayer should lead into contemplation, meditation, which is what we are talking about today. Those are two separate categories, by the way. And then vice versa, contemplation and meditation should flow into liturgy and into other types of prayer altogether. Now, on this Divine Office site, there are many resources And please God, we will have more specifically on the types of prayer called meditation and contemplation. So avail what you will of this site. There's such great stuff here. Good luck getting your hands on these volumes. You have no idea the heaven and earth I had to move to dig these up. You can get everything you want online, but sometimes things come with a price. Sometimes the price is time, sometimes it's money, as the case may be. All right, so there's your advertisement. The soul as garden, the church as garden. We begin proper with a mention of the woman from Revelation 12. This strange scene John has in that strange book of Apocalypse. He sees the woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars, faithfully reproduced in this stained glass type of icon. It seems there are certain biblical concepts that are best dealt with in iconography, which has a certain cartoonish aspect to it, that cannot really be replicated in more realistic styles of art. And in any case, we see the 7 dragons and all sorts of interesting imagery, the stars falling from the sky behind the dragon's tail, a lot of stuff going on here. But the point is, in interpretation, going back to the ancient church, the woman of Revelation 12 is primarily the Holy Church of God. However, a little bit later, you have the interpretation of the same as being the Virgin Mary. And this drives modern people absolutely bonkers, because modern people cannot think on multiple levels, as apparently ancient people could without any difficulty. So a modern person wants to know, well, which is the right one? It has to be one or the other. In ancient Christianity, this did not cause any sort of difficulty. Reading habits change. A lot of people don't read that the way, or a lot of people don't know that. The way you and I read in the 21st century is not the way people read 100 years ago, much less 1,000 years ago, etc. And so one of the big changes is this type of anal attentive literalism that we're stuck with in our day. But in any case, the simile of the woman in Revelation 12 as the church and the virgin was something the church fathers and later scholastics in the West saw as being quite complementary. That is to say, and this explains why the Virgin Mary becomes so prominent in, for instance, medieval Christianities, because the Virgin is taken, the mother of Jesus is taken as being the ultimate Christian. And in a sense, she is the sacramental of the church. She is the visible witness, the visible physical witness, a symbol of the church. And so the church reflected in the Virgin, the ideal of the Virgin, is quite complementary. Now, where am I going with this? Well, in Luke chapter 2, about verse 25, 26, you have the scene of the presentation. After 40 days from the birth of Christ, you have the presentation. This is liturgically commemorated on the 2nd of February, 40 days after the 25th of December. Incidentally, the 2nd of February is also Groundhog's Day here in America. In any case, in this scene, as we also see many years later at the wedding feast of Cana, when Christ is all grown up, something happens. In the instance of the presentation, 2 elderly prophets, Anna and Simeon, who are kind of bumming around the temple, come in and snatch the baby Jesus from Joseph and Mary's arms and begin prophesying, as you do, as old people can do, because they're old and we let them get away with things. And Simeon and Anna deliver certain interesting, somewhat disturbing meditations about the sorrows of the Virgin, which will happen. We consider the passion of Christ and the presence of the Virgin there. The point is, and this is appropriate to our meditation here, on meditation, the statement in Luke chapter 2 says, the Virgin contemplated these things in her heart. Mary kept these things in her heart. And as I say, this happens again at the wedding feast of Cana, and it may happen at some other point. I don't recall. The point is, the church as contemplative, the church as meditative. Now, these are two separate categories, to be very clear. I'll explain them momentarily. But we want to encourage the Spirit. Now, in the time of this recording, we are in Holy Advent. I happen to be broadcasting this on the 18th day of December, which falls, as it does every year, in the second half of Advent. So every liturgical season has two parts, and we are in the second part of Advent in the build-up to Christmas. And this is a very contemplative time, and we have so many opportunities in the office and other parts of the liturgy and in devotionals and things to consider the quiet of the Virgin, the quiet of the Holy Family. One of the feasts of Christmas tide, actually elevated in the past few decades to a Sunday, is the Feast of the Holy Family, where we actually meditate on the quiet years of Jesus, the so-called hidden years, the years in Nazareth. So from Advent through Christmas, at this time where the world is very, very busy, we have the opportunity to be quiet, to be contemplative. The church leads us into this, because this is ultimately what the Christian is meant for. And indeed, the simile of the garden is not just for Israel or for the new Israel, but we even see it in the Old Testament times used for the soul. We think of the Canticle of Canticles, where there's such imagery of not just plants, but also animals. My love is like a dove in a nest, in a coat. C-O-T-E, a coat, not a jacket, but a dove's coat. Right? So we have this imagery, this very intimate imagery of the garden. There's other intimate imagery in the Song of Songs, but it's another discussion altogether. American Christianity, let's move to that. And that's why I wanted to talk about this, because American Christianity does not have a meditative tradition. And that has to do with historical points, which I've dealt with before. You can look at my presentations, which are down below in the description, entitled Hedonistic Puritans 1 and 2. Hedonistic Puritans, where I get into some of these on a more nitty-gritty historical, cultural analysis level. But briefly, you need to fundamentally understand two things about American culture that if you fail to do this, you will not understand your ass from your elbow. One thing, and this and the next thing, explain why American Christianities do not have a meditative tradition. This pinnacle of the Christian life does not exist in this country. Before I explain this, what are the two traditions in American life that you must grasp, not just for religious reasons, but for many, many other reasons? One of which is American is a fundamentally Calvinistic country. And this is an extra religious observation. I'm not just saying that on a religious angle or a superficial denominational point. I'm saying that across the board. If you are American, you and I are Calvinists. I do not care if you are atheist, agnostic, Hindu man, China man, Buddhist guy, you are some type of Christian, you are New Age, you are American Indian, you worship the Great Spirit, smoking dope. I don't care. We are Calvinists. It is in our bones. That's going to have consequences. And I will lay out one that's appropriate to explaining why America does not have a meditative tradition. The second aspect that you have to grasp, regardless of what you or I think about the American Revolution and the American experiment, the second point is that we are all liberals with a capital L. We are all children of the Enlightenment. America is the ultimate tabula rasa. America is the ultimate blank slate. It is the only country that has a start date, not even a start year, literally July 4th, 1776. Press go. A nation of people who have no roots. Now, there are many, many things to say on these points, but we want to ask, why doesn't America have a meditative tradition? Well, just to cut to the chase, and I will do another presentation at my pleasure on this because it came up completely unrelated to what spurred this discussion with another student altogether. But one of the greatest questions of the last 500 years is how a beleaguered minority of people within medieval European cities, Jews, ended up convincing the entire world to think like themselves. It is a fascinating topic, one that needs to be dealt with delicately, but it is a palpable and chartable observation. And the frank reality is that Jews were behind the Reformation, and particularly Calvinism, and Jews were behind liberalism. For 1,000 years, for 2,000 years now, this group of people has had, actually longer than 2,000 years. You can go back well into the classical world and see this tendency. They are a profoundly rebellious and subversive people. And in European history, let's say for 1,000 years, the Jews had tried again and again to topple the church and the state at the same time. And you can see that in certain ancient heresies like Arianism, Islam. You can see that in the Albigensians in different ways. And every single time the Jews were struck down. They tried to bite off more than they could chew. And then eventually they learned that if you could topple the church, that's the Reformation, the shattering of Christianity, at one go and wait, then you could topple the monarchies and you could remove altar and throne. And that's fundamentally what happened in the Enlightenment. So it's a 1-2 blow. The Jews learned to pace themselves in their revolutionary spirit, and they destroyed the church in the Reformation. And then 200 years later, they destroyed the monarchies with liberalism. This is called intellectual history. And so the two strands of America, Calvinism and liberalism, are Jewish. And the Jewish people exist in contradiction to Logos, to God dwelling amongst us. They exist in contradiction to Emmanuel. Getting back to some Advent themes. So it's not for nothing. It's quite palpable how you ended up without a meditative tradition in what calls itself Christianity in America. And so you end up with a very Gnostical type of Christianity in the sense that faith becomes a compilation of doctrines and dogmas that you believe. Faith becomes the Holy Bible. And faith becomes, for most American Christians, most of the time, arguments and preaching. And there is no place for the garden of the soul. There is no place for keeping all these things in our hearts. Because Christianity is, in America, and I am not just talking about formal Protestantism, I also include with just as much incision Catholicisms and orthodoxies. All these groups should stop pretending they're singular entities. Just admit the chaos that is American religion. After all, just bite the bullet. Just admit it. But in any case, you got to admit a problem before you can solve it. If you want a singular Christianity, then you have to admit that it is not at present tense a singular thing. Even within the three main North American traditions, there are tremendous variations. In any case, American Christianity is Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, do not have a place for contemplation. Now, I will say that Catholicisms and Orthodoxies, at least institutionally, have a place for that in a way that formal Protestantism does not. But nevertheless, as a lived reality, American Christians of whatever denomination are not given to contemplation and meditation, which now invites of these words. So one comes before another. The use of meditation comes before contemplation. Contemplation, in other words, is a higher form of prayer. And there are other types of prayer. There's private prayer, maybe with a devotional or Stations of the Cross, to use the Catholic imagery, or a rosary. That's a devotional prayer. There's extempore prayer, just prayer from the heart. God, please protect my journey with my family in the car, whatever. Please help me ace this test. I'm sure no shortage of students send up that prayer every day. Right, that's extempore prayer. It's maybe prayer before meals. Sometimes that can be formulaic. That's another type of prayer, written prayers. Then you move into liturgical prayer, which is congregational prayer. Jesus says, where 2 or 3 pray in my name, there I am with them. So the church takes a cue from that and has us praying at various times with various set rituals, sometimes involving sacraments, sometimes not, like in the divine office. That's liturgical prayer, and it's a very powerful prayer. But then you move beyond that. You move to the hidden place, the dove cote, C-O-T-E. The interaction of God and the individual soul. We say God the Father. Well, a good father, a good mother for that matter, will have group activities for all their children, but a good parent will also make special time one-on-one with the child. And when we think about prayer, we see that the church provides that. The resurrection community provides that. We have times of common prayer, liturgical or just devotional, whatever. And then there ought to be in a healthy Christian life an aspect which I suggest is not present in America, and that is the meditative and the contemplative. So when we deal with meditative prayer, we are taking usually some scene in the life of Christ or from some other part of the Holy Bible, or just a general virtue or something that we want to go over, and we fondle that. We consider it, we read through it. There's another type of prayer, and there's a little bit of overlap here. There's a type of prayer called Lectio Divina, which is this meditative, contemplative, long form, long, slow reading of the Bible, often using our bodily senses, maybe dimming the lights, perhaps putting on calming music. We have all these machines. Well, let's use them well. So we can put on calming music, whatever we find, like we have, hopefully, checking the tech in the background of this recording. Okay. We want to, keep an eye on our eating when we pray. And this is across the board. You don't generally eat before you pray. And I don't mean just prayers before meals, but also, there's a role for fasting in terms of heightening spiritual consciousness, as there is with sleep and sleep deprivation, which is why monks and nuns pray in the middle of the night sometimes, right? It creates a different ambiance in the Orthodox Church and the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church. There are parts of the liturgy where the candelabra will be, chandelier, will be moved and will cast different shadows on the wall, and it's literally meant to disorient oneself. In fact, the Eastern liturgies altogether are meant to be disorienting, not in a sense of creating chaos, but in a sense of putting us physically, tangibly, in a sense, in a different time and place. That's why they're so damn long compared to the Western liturgies, where you can set your watch to a funeral mass or whatever. But yes, so meditation, and I'll have examples here coming up, don't worry. Meditation is taking often things from the gospel and chewing over them, but not chewing over them intellectually. We're going deeper than that. We're going even beyond the text into the meaning. We're fondling the reality. In the example we have here, I'm going to use some Catholic examples because that's what I'm most familiar with, but there are plenty of worthy Protestant and Orthodox manuals for meditation. We're going to use the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, and in those exercises, one of the modes of meditative prayer is, I think it's called apophatic prayer. And that is to say, imagining, using the imagination to put oneself in the scene. So, whatever, for Advent, you're with the Holy Family in the temple. What does the temple look like? You have to use your imagination. Close your eyes. What does it smell like? What are you hearing? All of these senses are brought into play in meditative prayer. Meditative prayer sometimes is likened to the masculine principle. It is active. So meditative prayer, you are using your faculties of imagination and of prayer, yes, of reading perhaps, and you are engaging with the subject, with God, in the different scenes that you are bringing in like a time warp before your eyes. You are placing yourself in the reality, and this is considered to be a masculine or active form of prayer, which is not at all to say that it's limited to men, but simply that it is active and it is, say, gendered in that way. Contemplative prayer is higher. What is contemplative prayer? Contemplative prayer is passive prayer, and which is why it's likened to the female. It receives. Contemplative prayer is letting the reality of the mystery, whatever you're chewing over. It doesn't have to be a scene from the gospel. It could be a reality, we'll say, contained in the epistles, or perhaps in just any worthy spiritual writing in this subsequent age of the church and age of the Holy Spirit. Whatever the fodder, the fuel for the meditation, in contemplation, we let it flow over us. We soak it in, if you want that simile. So meditation is actively engaging with it, and it ought to lead into contemplation. Now, historian and cultural observer that I am, getting back to some nitty-gritty, I'd mentioned that here in these United States, the various types of Christianities do not have a real place for these higher types of intimacy with God. And a lot of what calls itself Christianity in this country is stalled out in preaching, in argumentation, which presents itself as apologetics, in the intellect. And all of this has to do with the fact that we are Calvinists and liberals, and both of these are children of Judaism, and Judaism does not have a place for the logos and a place for the true intimacy of God with the soul. And that gets back into a meditation of what exactly Judaism is, but that's not appropriate to this point. It's simply enough to lay out these trends. Now, there are some interesting consequences of being a Calvinist and being a liberal. One of which, and this is also clearly coming out of Judaism, is that the American character is profoundly suspicious. And this, if you haven't noticed, is very prominent in American types of Christianities. So much so, and by the way, this lovely young lady, happily a redhead, we have all the days in the world for redheads, brunettes, black hair here at Apocatastasis's, not so much given over to the blondes. So, but we'll accept their enrollees, but I'll have to behave myself. Anyway, this lovely young lady is what came up when I typed in suspicious. So that's the image. And American people in general, and especially American Christianity, is very Jewish, and therefore it's very, very suspicious. And when you mention meditation and contemplation, a lot of Christians in this country, so-called, are very skeptical about this because they automatically think about the only group they can associate with meditation, and those would be that hodgepodge known as the New Age. And ironically, this is the topic for a whole other presentation, but ironically, I'm going to argue that the American phenomena, and indeed the Western phenomena of the New Age, is a direct consequence of modern Western Christianities not having a place for contemplative souls. Modern, argumentative, intellectual, preaching-oriented, study-oriented Christianities have no place for contemplative souls. And that has created a blowback. And that blowback is that God put contemplative and meditative souls on this earth. They have no place to go in American Christianity, and so a lot of these people end up in the New Age by hook or by crook. And what carries on as Christianity only knows the reference to meditation, contemplation from that group, or from ancient Eastern traditions, which themselves have meditative traditions. They don't realize, American Christians, so-called, don't realize their own contemplative tradition has been lost. And that creates this whole atmosphere that if you talk about meditation in certain circles, you'll be looked at like this pretty young girl is looking, very suspiciously. And it is emphatically my point in this presentation that that is not appropriate, that the Christian legacy has always authentically had a place for meditation and contemplation. Not only has it always had a place, that these aspects of the spiritual life are the highest. Politics is not the highest. Preaching is not the highest. Study is not the highest. These are worthy things. But in America, because of our Calvinism, because of our liberalism, because of our Judaism, these things become too prominent, which is what we have in our day, which is the over-focus on politics in religion and in argumentation. And this drives people, it drives sensitive souls into the various errors of the New Age. There are many good things, many true things, many seeds of the word, to quote St. Justin Martyr, in non-Christian traditions, and indeed in the hodgepodge chaos of the New Age. There are true things, but there are also many false things there as well. Nevertheless, sensitive souls that God wants to be Christian end up in the New Age often because modern so-called Christianity has forgotten its tradition, and that's what we're trying to recover. You know, the name Apokatastasis means restoration. And part of that in a society, I argue, and I will be laying this out more going forward, is a healthy spiritual life for the student, and indeed for all the members of the society. Secularism is profoundly unnatural. I'm not saying it itself does not have good parts to it. There is such a thing as a healthy secularism, but there is also such a thing as an unhealthy one, and it is a tremendous violation. It's a tremendous violation of a student and of the leaders of various institutions in this society to not make a real furrow, a real place, a real gutter for a spiritual life. And oh, please God, part of the work of Apokatastasis is reminding people that the spiritual life is not just part of life, but it's one of the more important parts of life. And part of that spiritual life is not just argumentation and politics and apologetics. It is moving beyond that. Don't want to forget about that stuff. That's good. That's worthy. But moving to the deeper aspects of the Christian journey, which can only be engaged in meditation and contemplation. Incidentally, and this is a beautiful part of the American journey, is the reinvention of the wheel. I keep an eye on what's called evangelical Protestantism, and there's something very endearing about American Protestants, and there's something very earnest about them. There's something also very frustrating, but I've said my piece on that end. But there is something very charming and very earnest and very innocent about American evangelicalism. And part of that is more times than you would imagine, reinventing ancient and medieval aspects of Christianity and never knowing it. So a few years ago, a bunch of dear Protestant people got it into their heads that it would be really, really cool if we could have a church that never closed and we would just praise Jesus with music and preaching and just read the Bible day and night. We literally would never close our doors. We're going to live stream it. We are going to pray all day. And that led to the creation of the International House of Prayer, which Americans will chuckle at because we have a very yummy franchise for breakfast with the similar acronym of IHOP, right? International House of Prayer, International House of Pancakes is IHOP. So, yeah, I mean, what did these people, without knowing it, end up creating? What is the International House of Prayer? Look, we're going to exalt Jesus 24/7. What is that? You tell me. It's a monastery. It only took, how many years, but Americans finally reinvented the wheel. We reinvented the monastery. And it's interesting too, I don't want to bog down in this subject, but there's something delightful in this and something very honest and open and earnest. I like that word about American Protestantism. And, a few years ago, some pastor was reading Acts of the Apostles and, oh my goodness, like Peter's shadow fell on people. So like if we pray over a cloth and, pray over water and things, and like we can send the water and the cloth to people, given that tangible experience of prayer, they can have prayers. Okay, you just invented sacramentals. Congratulations, you just invented sacramentals. Or in the 18th century, you had John and Charles Wesley. And John and Charles Wesley, like, wow, if we do the communion service every day and pray the Psalms, like that'll be a great method of being holy. That's the Methodists, get it? Do you ever wonder, like, what's the method of the Methodists? It's to do daily communion and read the Psalms. And once again, you just invented religious life. You just invented the life of the monks and the nuns. You don't call it that. Or in the 19th century in England, there were people, they couldn't call them monasteries, but hey, we're going to have like religious retreats. And we're just going to walk around the garden, think about Jesus all day, and we're not going to go into the world. It's just really interesting how people reinvent the wheel nowadays, and people have to be very careful with this for reasons of the CIA in America. But nowadays, you also have people very honestly realizing the chaos of Protestantism, the constant church splitting that you can set your watch to, the chaos doctrinally, and you have the new apostolic Reformation arising. This idea that there has to be a hierarchical structure to the Protestant church to solve the real problems that you see of church splits and doctrinal differences. To their credit, the wicked Jehovah's Witness sect, to their credit, has also realized this and has reinvented the wheel themselves. They're not Christians, but the Jehovah's Witnesses have also, in a roundabout way, invented monasteries with their Bethels, so-called Bethels, where people live and just produce tracts for the watchtower and this sort of thing. So it's all together interesting to see how Protestantism, and especially American-style Protestantism, has come across these truths and has resurrected these truths, unbeknownst that this has been a lost part of the Christian tradition. Anyway, let's get into some specifics here. I just have two examples. And again, there are many, many modes of tradition. These are just two from the Catholic world, which I'm familiar with, no doubt. There are these authors and approaches in orthodoxies and Protestantisms. So I'm just getting set up here with the document cam. And where is my book? Okay. I'm going to have to do this thing on a booster seat. Let me change the camera and get queued up here. And this is something that you and I can begin, and everyone watching can begin today. We don't need to go to a monastery or go to IHOP. We can make time. We ought to make time in our day for this. This meditation, this contemplation, is a normal part, ought to be a normal part of every Christian's journey. Okay, so here's the screen share, possible because of your donations. We have all these cameras that we can avail ourselves of in class and you're online. All right. So these are two books that I bring to your attention. They're both in the public domain. So you can easily download them from Yandex or even from archive.org or from many sites like the Christian Classics Ethereal Library has so many things. Or you want to move beyond, not forget about it, but move beyond just argumentation, politics, vocal prayer, even liturgical prayer. Move into meditation and then contemplation. So we're going to actually begin with this text, and this is a 16th century text by St. Ignatius of Loyola, and it's known most commonly as the Spiritual Exercises. And what's interesting about this version, put together by Father David Fleming, S.J. is Society of Jesus, or Jesuit. What's interesting about this particular version, Draw Me Into Your Friendship, is that it's a modernized translation of the Spiritual Exercises, originally written in Spanish, and it's compared to the literal translation from Spanish. And they're on facing pages here. So, for example, and I'm not going to get into the whole spiritual exercises, which are far more complicated than we need to, but just one exercise here, for instance, is the meditation on the resurrection. And even though this is designed to be done in a retreat house with a spiritual director, it can be quite profitable simply to do these meditations by oneself, maybe a different one every day. Right? But there's usually a preparation, so I take time for the usual preparatory prayer before God, right? Put yourself in the right headspace for the mystery that you're engaging with. You beg for the grace of being able to enter into the joy of the resurrection in this meditation. Then you use your memory. This is ataphatic prayer. I'm sure I'm messing that pronunciation up. But the setting in the usual way, I try to enter into this contemplation as fully as I can. Although I do not have a scripture account to guide my thoughts of the actual resurrection, right? You know that, right? At no point in the Gospels is the resurrection itself described, interestingly. So you have to use your mind. I can easily know the excitement of Jesus and wanting to share the joy. So you try to put yourself in the shoes of Jesus. You're trying to use your imagination in this particular type of meditation. You're putting there, what are you smelling? What are you hearing? You're hearing birds. You're hearing the women come. You try to put yourself in the mind of Mary. So these are very variable types of things. And then there are some other notes here, right? Now I'm going to contrast the joy of Easter morning with the Passion. Note how much the divinity shines for the person of Jesus. So I'm not going to read everything here. And you have so many, everything from the Annunciation all the way to the Ascension. And there's actually a lot of other other meditations, not all just biblical. Here is the meditation of the fall of Adam and Eve. There's the meditation on the two kingdoms, right? The idea of the kingdom of God and the kingdom of the devil, where you envision Christ as a king, as a literal king. And so this is a very variable type of prayer. Again, these are called the spiritual exercises, and this is meditative prayer. So you and I are engaging in the work of the mysteries that we're engaged with. Indeed, I'm sorry to use that word "engaged" so much. Right. So here's one version. Like I say, there are all sorts in the different Christian traditions of this. And then the other text, moving into contemplation, is The Soul of the Apostolate by Jean-Baptiste Chattard, a French priest at the time. What would we say? Between the two world wars, Father Chattard, Dom Chattard, actually, he was a Benedictine, I believe. Dom Chattard was enlisted as a chaplain in the First World War, and he was, because of that experience and because of some other things he saw in the world, the way that religious were behaving, he was quite taken aback at how busy people had become, including busy in holy things. growing churches, forming youth groups, working on publications. He's noticing this at the time of the First World War and following, and he was very worried about this. He's very worried about this. And this that I'm referring to is literally all that we have as Christianity, right? Works of mercy, activity, activism, preaching, apologetics, and so forth. Dom Chartard was seeing in France, which does have a more traditional understanding of Christianity, with these meditative and contemplative traditions. Dom Chartard was actually quite worried. He was noticing that people were neglecting the contemplative life, and he's warning people that you can't do that, even if you're engaged in the world. If you're a mother or a father, you don't have to be a monk or a nun or just a parish priest, a deacon, whatever. Every Christian needs to make time for contemplation. Once again, contemplation, which we liken this pretty nun here, right? We liken it to the feminine. Why? Because the female receives, right? She takes in. She's like Mary, right? To ponder these things in her heart. Men can learn from this position as well, just like women can learn from meditation, which is, gendered as masculine. These are not to be exclusive to the sexes. But the point is, the contemplative soul receives. It's not engaged in all of this work of imagining and putting herself in the footsteps of Joseph of Arimathea or whatever. The contemplative prayer is just being with God. Right. I mean, literally, this is borne out in the religious life. The religious literally does nothing. They are a testimony. They're a sacramental, just like Mary is a sacramental of the church, of the striving for holiness of the entire church of all history, is encapsulated in the Virgin Mary, which is why we have the two similes from Revelation 12 of the church and Mary, and they're not in contradiction. Likewise, the religious life is such that the monk and the nun are visibly living a life where they literally do nothing. All they do, their entire being, is simply letting God wash over them, living a life of contemplation. But this life, which they're experiencing in a very perfected sense, completely given over, is completely available to everyone in the world. And not only is it available, it is a normal part of the Christian life. This is what I'm trying to hammer home, and that in this country that we do not have this meditative and contemplative tradition creates a lot of eccentricity and frankly drives a lot of people into often with these sorts of souls into the New Age or into Eastern religions. And we don't need to go there, because we have a long tradition, Catholic, Protestant, Orthodox, of these routes. And we can begin, and some of us, like me, maybe don't move beyond just a few minutes every day of contemplation. A few minutes. You choose. Often this can be, the pump can be primed by some holy reading beforehand, whether that's the liturgy of the day or some saint or whatever, or just some happy thought or happy picture. And you just be with that reality. You just soak it in, like the religious is just makes themselves available to the reality. All right, so I think I've made my point here. These are easily accessible, and you'll find it's a whole world. These things and this science, and it is a science, it's an area of human knowledge. These things are available to everyone, and they're completely normal in the Christian life. And that's fundamentally the point that I'm trying to make here. So having, please God, made my point, I'm going to knock off. And I thank you for your attention to this matter, as a certain American politician says. All right. Valete